guys, so I'm going to be doing the second set of notes on geometric sequences for you on this video. Again, this is an optional note page, so please feel free to opt out if you don't want to, but it's a great way for you to have something to reference. I'm also going to be doing this again typing wise because I want you guys to have the ability to be able to type in if you do not have the ability to write in. Now, as you saw with the last video, if you watched it, it does take a little bit more time to type everything in than actually to write it in. So that's kind of the downside to typing versus writing. So I apologize about that, okay? So if you want to pause this video and write down a sentence of what you notice or wonder about these set of circles, you can. Okay, so now that you're kind of in the mindset of geometric sequences, we're going to be kind of talking about what a geometric sequence is. So a geometric sequence differs from an arithmetic sequence because it is a sequence for which consecutive terms have a common ratio. So instead of a common difference, it has a common ratio. Okay, so a common ratio is a ratio of a term to the previous term, or in other words, its multiplier. So instead of us saying, how much do I have to add or subtract to get the next term, I'm asking myself, how much do I have to multiply or divide to get to the next term, okay? Just like arithmetic sequences, geometric sequences have two different types of formulas. They have a recursive formula and they have an explicit formula. You'll notice that the recursive formulas here are very, very similar to the arithmetic sequence. We have our first term, which is the actual first term. And then instead of putting a plus here, like what you add or subtract every single time, it's a times. So it's very similar. So saying here's the first term, you take the previous term, which is this fn minus 1, and then you times it by this number to get your next term. The explicit formula is a little bit different than the arithmetic one. On this one, we have our first term starting, and then you multiply by the common ratio, so your multiplier, and then you raise it either to the nth term if you're given the 0th term, or the n minus 1 term if you're given the first term, okay? So I'm going to go through this, and again, please bear with me because it does take a while to type all of these things in. So what I'm going to do to help myself out here is I'm going to I'm going to undo that actually, because I don't know what I just did. I'm going to copy this formula. I'm going to place it down here so that I can use it. And I'm going to also copy this formula so I can use it down here as well. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing for my first term. So in this specific class, we're going to assume that we're always given the first term unless otherwise stated. And so if they say like this is the 0th term, then you would know that it would be the 0th term, but for all intents and purposes, we're going to assume it's the first term, okay? So we're going to be using these for our equations today. So the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out what is our first term here. So our first term here is just 2. Now, the one thing that's a little bit harder about this is you're going to have to figure out what is the multiplier. Now, when my students look at this, they're like, what are you talking about, Ms. Strickland? 2 to 3, you add 1, 3 to 4.5, you add 1.5, and then you get all crazy with these decimals. So if you get lost and you don't really know how to find the multiplier, what you can do is you can just take the two numbers and divide them. What I mean by that is not 2 divided by 3, but 3 divided by 2. So you take your first two numbers and divide them, and that gives you your multiplier. So I'm not really sure. Here we go. So if we did 3 divided by 2, this would equal 1.5, and then this will give me my common ratio. So if I multiplied 3 times 1.5, I would get 4.5, and if I did 4.5 times 1.5, I would get 6.75. Okay, and so we know our A is equal to 2 here, and our ratio is here, and that works every single time. Not really sure what's happening with the formatting of mine, but so our first term is 2, okay, and our common ratio here is 1.5, okay, so that would be our recursive formula. Then our explicit formula, same thing. Our first term here is 2, and our common ratio here is, and I add parentheses in, 1.5. You don't have to add parentheses in, but I think it's important just because then people are brought to the idea that you have to do the exponents first and then multiply. If you don't add the parentheses in, a lot of times people think, oh, I can multiply 2 times 1.5 first before I do the exponents, and that's not true, okay? So what we just did was we looked at our sequence and we were able to come up with our first term, our common ratio, and then give our recursive formula, which is, whoops, which is the these two items, and then our explicit formula, okay? So if you want to pause the video and do B, C, and D first, and then come back to this video, I would encourage you to do that. Okay, so hopefully you've tried a few. What we're going to do now is we're going to finish and do B, C, and D. So to help me with B, I'm going to just kind of paste this in so it's a little bit easier. So our first term here is 1.5. And on this one, our common ratio, we can do 3 divided by 1.5 to give us our common ratio, which is going to be a ratio of 2. Okay, so we're just timesing by 2 every single time. So we'll just change this first term to be 1.5, and we'll change our common ratio to be 2 when we multiply. And then same thing here, our first term is 1.5, and our common ratio here is 2. And we have now our recursive formula and our explicit formula, okay? For C and D, again, I apologize because I'm going to have to do this manipulation. Actually, you know what I think I might do is I might just extend your guys's notes, okay? So I'm going to just, so that it's not so difficult to have to type this in every single time, I'm going to do C and D below so that we can just copy and paste this so that we're not having to retype every single time. So just know that if you're deciding to print these out after I share them, that it's going to be a little bit more pages than was initially anticipated, okay? So for C, our first term, you can clearly see is 48. And then we're going to take 24 divided by 48 to give us our common ratio, which is going to be 0.5 or a half. So then we do our first term is 48. And we're going to put this as 0.5. Now, please note here that we are not allowed to put divided by 2, okay? With our recursive formula and with our explicit formula, we always have to use the multiplication symbol. So if you notice that it's dividing by 2, dividing by 3, dividing by 4, you cannot put divide here and then the number, okay? You have to put the multiplication. And that's why it's so important to just take the second term and divide it by the first term to get your common ratio. That way you're always using that that multiplication symbol, okay? So our first term was 48 and our common ratio is 0.5. On this one, same kind of thing. So our first term is 90, and if we did 30 divided by 90, you'll notice that essentially it's dividing by 3, but this is going to give us 0.33333333 forever, or 1/3 if you notice that, okay? And so when we do our recursive formula, our first term is 90, and then our common ratio is going to be that 1/3. So our first term is 90, and then our common ratio is that 1/3. Okay, now if you put 0.3, that's fine as well, but really you want to probably put 0.33 at least, like 2 3s, so that people understand that it's not just 0.3, like timesing it by 3/10, that it's more than that, okay? So that ends this set of notes. Hopefully in this set of notes, you were able to determine, given any sequence, you were able to determine the first term, the common ratio, the recursive formula, and the explicit formula. And then really go back and make sure that you understand how to interpret these as well. That's really important for your quiz and your test.